Hey everyone, welcome to today's discussion titled Digital Adoption, How a Modern Tech Stack Will Drive Hotel Recovery. My name is Jason Freed and I'll be moderating today. Before we start, I'd like to cover a few logistical items. This session is being recorded and tomorrow we'll send an email to all the registrants with a link to the video. The audio is on mute for all the attendees, but please feel free to ask questions during the presentation by using the Q&A button at the bottom. I have a list of questions for our esteemed panelists, but I'd really love to help answer some of your questions from the audience during the discussion. We'll also have a couple poll questions sprinkled throughout as well, so please participate in those. This discussion follows an in-depth special report we published on Hotel Recovery 2020 in partnership with SHR and StayNTouch. And if you haven't read it yet, I encourage you to check it out. To download it, just visit hotelrecovery2020.com, and in the top right, you'll see a big red button that says Integrations Report. So I'd now like to introduce you to our panelists who have graciously taken time out of their busy schedules to join us today. If you can see my screen, at the bottom, I'm reading from left to right. We have Estella Hale, who is Chief Product Evangelist at SHR. We have Priya Rajamani, who's Client Services and Quality Manager at StayNTouch. We have Julia Josephson, who's Corporate Director of Revenue at Salt Hotels. We have Bianca Porto Barga, who is Distribution and Revenue Leader, formerly with Lux Hotels. And like many of our colleagues, Bianca is currently looking for her next role. So if you need an expert in these areas, find her on LinkedIn. And we have Segredo, CEO of Data Travel, which is the parent company of Hapi. I'm gonna stop sharing. So I'm gonna start out with why we're all here. A few months ago, I set out to tackle this special report with a few partners with really one idea in mind. I knew that after talking with hoteliers for so many years that one of the biggest challenges, if not the biggest challenge, is managing all the components of a hospitality technology stack needed to run a hotel and best serve our guests. In fact, I believe, and I don't think I'm alone, that many hoteliers have been forced to become experts in technology instead of experts in hospitality. You know, a big part of that challenge is getting all the different systems to speak with one another and to share data in a two-way environment. And that's why we're going to hear from Lou on some of the innovations in that area that he's working on. So in building this report, I set out with a single question: how can we fix this? I wanted to get to the bottom of, what does the ideal tech stack look like? And what are hoteliers and tech suppliers doing to help overcome these challenges? So that's actually where we'll start. I'd like to start with Julia. And Julia, I'd ask if you can kind of describe what your tech stack looks like currently, and how much of your role is managing technology versus actually managing revenue.
Sure. Well, we have a PMS. We use StayNTouch, where Priya is related to. For the CRS, we use SHR. We have a CRM and an RMS. So, and they're all different providers. And in terms of how much of my job is spent managing them, I would say it varies depending on the level of problems we're having with them. So if things are running smoothly, then I can often have a good week where I'm not that involved in tech management. But then if there's something happening with an integration that we need to address, it often can take over my life. So it varies.
And Bianca, in your former role, how did you sort of approach that? How much of your job was managing these tech systems and their integrations?
A lot of my job was managing the tech systems because we had at the time 74 hotels and they all use different solutions. So my role specifically, I was very involved with working with the integrations, and I was laughing while Julia was talking because yes, depending on what happens, it can take over your life.
Yeah, let me ask some of the tech providers on the discussion kind of the same question. Estella, from your point of view, you've been in the industry a while. Have you seen this sort of evolve, the number of systems that a hotelier needs?
Absolutely. It has evolved, and there has been an effort in trying to consolidate how we communicate with each other. That's where standards come in, etc. But some of the times it just turns into this minimum common denominator that we write into, and then just as Julia was saying, when everything is very smooth and you're just using those minimum common denominators, everything is running smoothly. But then when you try to bring in strategy and think differently, and where we are today, that's where some of the challenges come in. And so it's twofold. On the one side, the integration is the means to the end, right? The end is that these revenue strategists have a goal in mind and what they want to achieve, and technology is simply enabling that, and they're becoming experts in how to overcome these challenges. So while it is a challenge that we have today, one of the advantages that we have when we work together with the hotel and the technology partners as partners is that we're able to tackle some of these things, is that we're able to say, okay, that may be the industry standard, that may be the minimum common denominator, but how do we now have to add to that to enable this strategy? Unfortunately, then that happens within that environment, and then we have to tackle it again and again. But it is important that the integrations are there, certain standards are at least follows, and then the relationship between the vendors and listening to what it is that the strategy from a revenue and distribution perspective is trying to achieve.
Yeah, Lou, I think, Louis from Hapi, I think, you know, you had sort of some similar thoughts when you set out to build Hapi, and, you know, it's not the first product that you've built in the hospitality technology space. But when you set out to build Hapi, was that sort of one of the issues that you wanted to tackle, is the complicated nature of the fragmented tech stack and all the integrations that it requires?
Well, I lived it when in my prior life. I had a product that was integrated to a bunch of different applications, and we lived it. So to be clear, like Estella's challenges that she's talking about is more on the distribution side. We're more operational. We're kind of following the journey after reservations have been created and flowing through. But the way I view it is, if she mentioned standards, I kind of made a note here. The standards are helping to get things developed. The way that we're approaching it is that we're saying the other half of this is actually implementing. So our idea is, if we could build connectivity to the systems of record like a PMS once, and then manage that connectivity from a central place, all partners would connect into that, so that the deployment side of it and the support side of it is mitigated. The effort is mitigated.
Yeah, great. That's helpful. So we're going to get into, you know, the COVID, the new COVID world that we're all dealing with, and the data that we're trying to collect on a daily and weekly basis. Before we do that, I want to do a quick poll question for our audience. So let me figure out how to pull up a poll, and if you guys could help answer this, that would be helpful. Okay, our question: what type of new technology are you considering implementing within the next year? You can select all that apply. Contactless check-in is the technology du jour, I believe, and guest messaging as well, right? With COVID going on, everybody's trying to figure out how to connect with their guests in a digital manner.
While we do that, Mr. Freed, I'd like to point out that the second question is right below the first, in error of he who created the polling questions. So,
so do we have to answer both, or can we answer one and then answer the second one?
I would answer them both.
Okay, cool. So question 2, audience, if you will. How do you plan on using technology to support your smaller teams? Obviously, since COVID and since the subsequent travel lockdown, a lot of us have, you know, been forced to furlough and let people go and operate with smaller teams, unfortunately. And I know that technology helps there. Technology can help solve that challenge by automating a lot of the issues that we were doing manually. So there we go. And we'll get some answers here. As expected, a lot of hoteliers looking to implement a contactless check-in solution / digital key solution. Next up being guest messaging platform. Hey, when I built this question, I think I ordered them in exactly the right order here, because it looks like people responded at the top. Question number 2, how do you plan on using technology to support smaller teams looking to automate, right? I think that's the big thing that we're all trying to do. The cloud answer there interests me. I'd love to hear from some of our panelists later on in the discussion. I think that hoteliers may not, and I don't mean to speak for them, but may not understand really truly the advantage of moving to the cloud and how that really helps solve a lot of these integration problems and make things more automated and help share data across the systems. We'll get into that at a later discussion, or maybe everybody is already into the cloud.
Hey, Jason, also what I see interesting is that nobody said none to question number 1. So this is actually what we are seeing in the market, that even though we do have, our properties have less staff, it is also opening the opportunity to looking at things that when we were so busy, we didn't have a chance to look at. So I think it's very interesting that nobody said none to question number 1.
Yeah, great point, Estella. One thing I wanted to follow up on, and this is kind of out of the order of our questions here, I hope you guys don't mind, is I'd like to ask you, Priya, because this, contactless check-in, digital key, guest messaging platform is really what you guys have been focusing on over the past few months. Without making it a commercial for StayNTouch, talk about why you guys decided to dive into that, how it's been going, and how the hoteliers have been receiving it.
Right. So, when we came into the market, Jason, our goal was to come in as a cloud-based PMS with the ability to offer mobility so that you're not, tied behind the front desk and you're not operating only in the traditional way. You're not having to invest in extensive hardware to get a PMS up and running. So our focus was to give you that flexibility, the scalability that comes with cloud, along with deployment capabilities that make it easy for your staff to adapt, learn, transition from an old PMS model to the new one. What we evidently see, and what has been reflected in the polling statistics, even though it's a smaller segment here, is our capabilities, which we were trying to hard sell, which we were trying to enforce on our customer set and kind of try to get them to adopt and adapt to the new technology, is now right at the front, where at the very forefront, where the customers are now reaching out to us, wanting to enable all these solutions for them, which were always a part of the package. It was just something that they were not used to doing. It was not something that was a part and parcel and natural process in their daily operations. And now what we are seeing is an evident shift in wanting to use it themselves, wanting to move into the whole, Zest Web, your mobile check-in capability through any device that you have already accessible to you, or a kiosk-based check-in where you don't require staff to be available, where you can come in and do your whole self-check-in along with the digital key experience like they've indicated here. So what we're seeing is, instead of us having to train and get them to adopt it, this is now becoming more of a forefront question from the customer saying, we would like to go that path. So that's definitely a shift we are seeing. Yeah,
thank you. That's helpful. Julia, I'm wondering at SALT how you guys are tackling the sort of contactless check-in, if you will. Can you first start out with a little bit about SALT, how many hotels you have, where they're at, and sort of how this contactless experience has evolved?
Sure. So SALT Hotels, we have 4 hotels, actually, I guess 5 hotels. We just announced one in development that's opening in the spring. 2 of them are very small bed and breakfasts in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And, contactless there for us means sort of sanitizing the physical keys because they're locks, not like a Salto electronic lock. So sanitizing those and putting them in like a nice envelope that's labeled for them and handing that to them when they arrive. We're definitely
have the hardware, the gold keys that go into the door and you turn.
We do.
I love those. That is so cool. I gotta check that out.
It is very cool. Yeah, Saltoston and Even House both have those. Our larger properties, the Asbury Hotel and Asbury Ocean Club, our luxury 5-star hotel in Asbury Park. They both are a little more modern with the keys and we use regular electronic locks, but so that makes the process a little bit easier. I was laughing when Priya was saying though that the existing customers are reaching out to try to use the services we were already paying for, and that's because we've definitely been in that category of reaching out to start using more of the Zest web and trying to figure out how that can best help us meet the needs of guests today in this climate.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's stick with you, Julia, if you don't mind. I'm going to shift away from sort of the contactless experience and talk more about sharing data across the entire tech stack. Now, I mean, I guess that does tie into the guest messaging, because you want, you want that to tie into all the other systems that you've got as well, especially your property management system and likely your CRM and things like that. But how, since COVID, what has changed in the turn? You're in the revenue department, right? So obviously, a big part of your job is tracking down that demand that's out there. What demand is out there now, and setting yourself up for better ways to capture that demand in the future. What data sets are you looking at today? What are you collecting and analyzing? What's your daily and weekly operations look like?
It's definitely hard right now. The data that I was using last year this time is not the data that I can really rely on now in terms of helping me make smart decisions. We did a lot of comparisons to last year and to STR data. Our STR data isn't even really complete because not all of our properties are reporting. And so and comparing to last year is depressing and not helpful with the demands having shifted so much. So I'm much more focused on, key metrics and in comparing them to like how they were last week and where we ended up at the end of the week, which is not, it feels more reactive than I would like it to feel, but I do think it's kind of the only way to stay in it and to be making smart decisions. We've also, we normally spend more time looking at our competitors, and we're still looking at our competitors and aware of what they're doing, but when they're making silly moves, we're not following, and that's also hard, and sort of balancing where we need to sort of maintain from a rate integrity standpoint, and where, if there's no demand, then giving away another $50 is not helpful.
Yeah, Estella, you guys StayNTouch introduced, SHR introduced a revenue management solution earlier this year called Wave. Can you talk a little bit about how that product has evolved since COVID, and how hoteliers are using the data that they can get out of Wave?
Yeah, from our perspective, one of the things that changed immediately with this crisis is how we looked at data, how the revenue management system, for example, was doing forecasting. Where traditionally forecasting was previously putting great importance on seasonality, on historic trends, on comp set. Now the forecasting and the altering of the algorithm itself is looking a lot more at short-term forecasting, short-term expectation, short-term booking data, and short-term behavior of the guests themselves within the booking engine, so that we can make pricing decisions where buying decisions are made. And then also looking at segmentation, right? Market segments that maybe in the past were not a big part of the mix, and seeing, okay, do we need to pay attention to those? And then guest segmentation as well. So shift in how we're looking at data, shift in the algorithms themselves, and shift on the forecasting and recommendation based on segmentation.
Yeah, and you need all those systems to be talking to each other, right? To be able to do this accurately. And I think that's kind of what we're getting at with the topic of this conversation today. And I'll ask you and Priya to talk about how that sort of works. But I know at SHR you guys have a CRM product, an RMS product, and a CRS product. Talk about the advantages of having those products deeply integrated and be able to share that data.
Sure. Well, from a distribution perspective, we believe that to move from just being a transactional system, from being just a system that connects to channels and moving it to a system that can allow hotels to connect to guests. The key components are guest recognition. So that's why CRM, guest connectivity. So that's why CRS, and enabling strategy. So that's why RMS. So if we can apply modeling, if we can apply artificial intelligence to the sets of data that we have within the systems, we can create interoperability between them. So again, just as I was expressing, the revenue management system is taking into consideration behaviors that we're seeing on the booking engine itself. The booking engine is powered by the CRS, the price recommendation is powered by the RMS. So all of these systems have a library of APIs that are available for connectivity. We're now using them for that interoperability so that one system can inform another.
Yeah. Priya, Estella was talking a lot about segmenting and, you know, tailoring experiences almost to an individual guest level, and maybe even tailored pricing, but really guest recognition and building those guest profiles. Where does the PMS come into play there, and how are you guys, you know, helping hoteliers build guest profiles, and what successes are you seeing there?
Yeah, great question, Jason. So, you know, traditionally the profile management model used to rely on the basics of guest data, get the name, get the address, get the telephone number. What we're of course seeing is this is now evolving. We want alternate modes of communication captured, so we are able to communicate with our guests at different platforms across the model or the medium of their choice. So there's a lot more focus on getting, their email addresses, their mobile telephone numbers. What we're also seeing is a shift in the communication pattern itself. So we are seeing a lot of pre and post stay, as well as in-house communication that wants to be sent out to the guests while they're at a hotel. And hoteliers shifting towards wanting to capture as much information of the guests prior to their arrival so they can cater and service their needs better with the lesser staffing and all of that has become, almost a necessity today. So we are seeing a shift in that. What you're also seeing is, the whole concept of ID scan and facial recognition, which were, very new technologies initially, are becoming more of a requirement now. So what is happening today is people are going forward and enabling these abilities that they have integrated within the PMS to capture that information, which then in turn, when you're able to capture a guest image, facilitates guest recognition, and so on. So we're definitely seeing an evolve of the kind of information that we're capturing on the guest, in addition to building a guest profile to be able to service their needs better.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Hey, Louis, I know you've got some interesting thoughts around the CRM and the capabilities there. And, I'll preface this question with, we know an in-house CRM may not be for everyone. I think it's a great help for a lot of hotels, but for some hotels who may be looking for, a more low-touch option, I think you guys have built one. Can you talk a little bit about the connection to Salesforce and what it allows hoteliers to do?
The way we view it, and I definitely appreciate Stella's point of interoperability and the tight connectivity that can be built, and that's more of a productized offering. What we see is that for larger groups, or a group that's actually not smaller groups, but the groups of a little more size that want to that would traditionally build their own CRM solution, that would say, hey, I'm going to ground up, I want to own this stack. We're really looking more at the open platforms, and such as Salesforce. And the idea would be, why build it yourself if you can go out there and use what the rest of the world is using? It's so they've gone very wide in terms of having the AI tools that come in with Einstein, and they have the Marketing Cloud, which is a great omni-channel communication platform that takes that 360-degree view of a customer, regardless of the market. And really be able to engage with them. And what we've done is we said, well, why try and reinvent the wheel? Let's build a connectivity that we can flow data in real time in, so that you can build transactional emails and guest communications off of this. that you can later cache, store the stay history, so you can build AI against it, or even market that customer, understanding previous engagements, previous stays.
Awesome.
So we took an approach that we said, hey, let's just be the enabler that connects into the open platforms.
Great, thanks, Lou. Hey, a reminder to our audience, I don't see any questions in here. Let's start asking questions, guys. I know there's things you want to know from these people, and I know they're willing to answer them. So throw in some questions and we'll get to them. I'll shift gears a little bit. I want to go back to something that we saw in the poll question that we asked about leaner staff and using technology and using systems to sort of automate more of the processes. Bianca, we haven't heard from you for a while. I wonder if you've got thoughts on how hotels are sort of dealing with smaller staffs, and do you think they are using technology, or do you think they can use technology to sort of bridge that gap?
I think they can. I think as hoteliers, we have a 24/7 business, 365 days a year. So a lot of times we really don't have time to speak to vendors or to evaluate some new technologies that are out there. I'm guilty of that too. I think my last role, because I was dealing with so many properties, I was forced into talking to a lot of vendors, and I'm so grateful I did, because I found out that I was missing out on a lot of opportunities that, I didn't have time to check before. I think it's super important to automate as many services as possible so we can take care of the guest. I've seen a couple of new technologies or technologies that were out there, but I never really gave too much attention, like chatbots. There's a new application called Soleil that now you can manage your seats on the pool, which is a problem if you haven't gone to a hotel or resort. Now you can spend at some places 1 hour at the pool, or you have to reserve your chairs before. And with that, you need to employ more staff at the pool, or you need to have an Excel spreadsheet to control that. So I think there are solutions that are being created now to really tackle those problems. And I think we need to use more of those solutions. It's been really interesting to hear that now people are going to the vendor and asking for, the solutions that we already had, but they never paid attention to. It's interesting to hear that. And I think we have a long way to go. But it's good to hear that people are now kind of waking up and realizing that it's past time for us to adopt some of this technology.
Yeah, Priya, what are your thoughts on automating some more of these back of the house processes? I know you mentioned earlier that you are getting some hoteliers coming to you asking you about this. Is this something that you're working with hoteliers on to solve?
Yes, absolutely. It is definitely the need of the hour. I think we've approached it in 3 different formats. One, of course, is the ability to transition to a PMS, to make that as easy to use, as easy to train, as easy to deploy. Even if it's an entirely remote deployment model, it is something that we can fulfill today, especially given the travel conditions that we have today and the vast spread of our clients across the globe. It becomes very, very important for us to be able to deploy this technology across different countries in a remote format, in a format that's easy for them to consume and transition to. In addition to that, easy to use doesn't necessarily mean lack of features. What we're doing is making it available for them to have as much flexibility as they can or they want to have with our open API integrations, the list of partners and vendors that we integrate with across our technology offering. That then enables the customer to leverage that to automate some of these services, whether it's guest communication, whether it's service delivery, whether it's any form of digital keys that we spoke about. So all of these through our integrated vendor partners, we're able to offer that across the platform. And the third point that I wanted to talk about was some of these offerings have to come inbuilt with that capability of automation. So when you're talking about doing this whole Zest Web or kiosk check-in, we want to take away this, the format which is replaceable, which can be automated. Be it auto room assignment or auto room check-in, bulk check-in. So we're kind of bringing in all that technology that allows you as a hotelier to leverage this automation and make the most of it and offer enhanced services and add-ons all through as an inbuilt process. So you're not having to do it manually. Apart from that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Estella, I'm curious, I know you guys have multiple products. I don't mean to keep asking you about revenue management, but that's what sticks in my head. in revenue management, automation is sort of a scary word right now, right? Like it's sort of the balance of, is revenue management more of an art or more of a science? Do you want the systems doing all the forecasting and pricing for you, or do you need really somebody overlooking that? I'm curious how you guys are balancing that at SHR.
With the technology that we have both the human intelligence portion and the machine intelligence, the artificial intelligence portion. So we have a way of implementing systems where it simply automates existing rules that are being done manually by someone, and then it checks against the algorithm and the price recommendation, and one or the other is accepted. But through any of the systems, CRS, RMS, CRM, or even in integrations that you have in your in-house system, I think what Bianca was saying is one of the things that our attendees can take out of today, which is look at what is already offered. It is possible that when you went live with something, you went live with that existing operation and you mapped everything to enable that operation. So if you have in mind automation today, look at your existing stack, what is offered, and what other things you had not implemented maybe at go live, but can allow you to do some automation today. Also, as you are seeing that, just make deliberate decisions on what operational practices to keep and which others you can shift or you feel comfortable in automating.
Yeah, that's great.
Jason, can I expand upon that?
Elaborate
a bit? This is a topic that I'm really passionate about. I think that the Estella, you added on to what Bianca says, and I'm going to add on to what you say. And there's a part of this that's not even about automation. In dealing with fewer people, you just have to spread the work across. And some of the effort, we just need to change the operational model. And the hotel companies are doing that today, that they're taking roles that they can no longer afford to keep on premise and say, how do we cluster operations? Much like you've seen with revenue management, you've seen with central reservations, you've seen in other areas that you don't have reservation agents in most hotels anymore. You're going to see more roles that can consolidate it. And I think that some of the tools that are out there are supporting that today. But like with Priya, when you're looking at things that are in the cloud, it's easier to create the models that you could say, well, I'm going to take these housekeeping functions and move them off. I'm going to take these PBX functions, and I'm going to centralize them. I'm going to take these management functions, I'm going to centralize them. And I think that that's where there's a lot of opportunity right now that the marketplace needs to step up and deliver solutions.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to interject with a question from the audience here. This is a great one. I appreciate you guys asking some questions. We've got a number of them in there now. This is an interesting one, and I'd like everybody's opinion on this, if we can kind of each touch on it quickly. What's the biggest misconception you see from hoteliers right now as it relates to hotel tech? Let me start with Lou on that one.
I was afraid you'd beat me first. The biggest misconception.
Yeah, everybody else gets a few seconds to think about it. So the biggest misconception you see from hoteliers right now. I know it's a tough one. I have
It's a tough one.
I have a thought because we have a number of other questions in here about investment in technology. How are people allocating their budget to invest in technology? I would say one misconception is that you have to tackle this all at once, right? That you have to go out there and spend millions of dollars per month on implementing an entire technology stack, when really you can start slow and sort of crawl before you walk, if they say. Does anybody want to build off of that maybe?
I think that if there's one thing that we could say is that the application of tech isn't necessarily going to drive demand back in the same fashion. So I think that it's unfortunate, but it's a reality that we're challenged with demand. We need to drive demand back, but that the technology in the hotel is good for the sake of creating efficiency. It's good for creating better experiences. It's good for better cleanliness, but you know, the contactless, for example. But it doesn't mean that it's going to drive the demand back that quickly.
Julia, to respond to that, because I wonder if you have different opinion on that, Julia. My guess is that you sort of do rely on the technology to get demand back, correct?
Yeah, I would say absolutely, absolutely. And you know, and marketing to the guests who we have built these great guest profiles on is a really important piece of that for sure. And then in terms of the misconceptions, I think people think that it's going to be very expensive to implement these tools, like, you know, and it was not very expensive for us to implement as a brand. StayNTouch and SHR, you know, the setup fees I felt were reasonable, especially if you compare them to sort of the legacy systems. So it's not like committing to Opera, right? It's not like $60,000. It's you know, and they generally, these newer companies offer like pay-as-you-go models where you sort of paying for the software as a service rather than all of it up front, like we are used to with companies like Oracle.
Yeah, Jason, I forgot who my peers were. Obviously, I think that from a demand generation perspective, the finding demand that's out there, technology is definitely the way that we've got to be engaging, and now's the time to do it. I was thinking more of the operational aspects of it.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree with you there, Louis. Bianca, I'm curious on your. Oh,
Hey,
go ahead.
Jason, I was going to add to what Julia says in regards to misconception. I think that disconnected and manual systems are costly. So having certain fear of the cost of adding some of these tools, when you really start to measure it, it makes it easier to make that decision.
Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts on misconceptions before we move on?
The only thing that I would like to add is that I think a lot of people are concerned that the technology will replace the human. I see that especially with revenue management systems. It's not always, but sometimes we have this challenge convincing hotels into this is going to actually make your life easier and your job better. It's not going to replace you. So that's one that I see a lot.
Anybody want to follow up on that? I know we have some strong thoughts about that.
I guess the only aspect that I wanted to kind of build on was, of course, you know, to consider the whole software as a service model and to know that you're paying for what you're getting. So to look into that in your research of the technology vendors that you're partnering with. And then, of course, the second aspect, which always comes when we are, you know, talking to our different customer prospects, easy to use doesn't need to be confused with light on features. You can get the whole gamut. So make sure that you do your research.
Yeah. In a number of questions around investing in technology, and maybe I'll just kind of summarize them all. And I'll start with you, Julia, since you know you're sort of the hotelier on the group that I imagine has to pitch some of these investments to other people within the company. So one question is, you know, how has that evolved? You know, is it you making decisions? Is it somebody at the revenue level making decisions on investment? Who do you have to pitch that to get those things approved? And then I'll ask the suppliers on the group the same question of, you know, how those conversations are changing.
Since we're still a fairly small company, honestly, it ends up coming up to our CEO usually, especially if it's a big thing that we're investing in. If it's a small thing, it's sort of more handled on a lower level. But you know, he definitely gets involved in these situations. He's a big fan of tech, and he has prioritized technology in our growth because he knew that doing so would help us grow, and it definitely has. You know, the choices we made 2 or 3 years ago about the technology have set us up for more success in this difficult time than we otherwise would have been.
So what do you think, Julia, I'll stick with you for a second. What do you think has been helpful for sort of selling those ideas to your CEO? I mean, if you need a system and you think it's going to help you, how do you go about selling that to your CEO?
Always with return on investment in terms of numbers, right? Like how much we can expect to see something change either something that hasn't been going well, how much it can improve, or something like a revenue management system, pitching it based on how much we think it will help us grow, and in these certain ways that we're currently missing because we're doing things more manually.
Yeah, I'll ask that's a great feedback. Thank you. Thank you, Julia. So I'll ask the suppliers the sort of same question from the supplier side. Estella, how have you seen those conversations changing? Now that we're in a much tougher time and budgets are tighter, are those conversations more about ROI, or are you talking to different people in the process? Are you talking to property level people? Are you talking to brand level people? Are you talking to management companies, or kind of all of the above?
It is a mix. It is a mix. The people that we talk on the distribution side hasn't changed as much. It's typically distribution and revenue management, but the conversations themselves have moved beyond, again, that transactional side to implementing strategy. So the conversations had moved from only connectivity to connectivity and guest recognition, or connectivity, guest recognition, and revenue management strategy. One other thing that I was going to add in regards to when you're pitching this, to who's going to sell it and to who's going to use it, right? Because as Bianca says, how is this going to replace me? Training staff, and especially with the turnover that we have right now, is important. So choosing a system that is has that user in mind, not light and features, but that user in mind for training and usage of the system is important. If you want profiles, if you want your staff at the property to collect meaningful, accurately profiles in a least invasive manner, you can't just make every field mandatory, right? You have to convey why this is important. You have to tell them how they can see how the engagement is moving to a virtual side, and that's how the digital relationships will go. So with training and understanding, you can pitch not only to the buyers, but also to the users within your property.
Yeah, Priya, anything to add to that?
No, I guess, like Estella mentioned, it's not necessarily the customer set that we're talking to that has changed. So it's essentially the same people, be it the management company or the users, but it's the kind of request that we're getting in terms of features that has now changed. So integration partners, ability to automate, ability to be mobile. So those are the conversation pieces that are now coming into the process. And like she mentioned, the whole training and deployment, the ease of that. So yes, so the conversation topics have changed, not so much the customer set.
Yeah, let's stick with that topic of that Bianca brought up and mentioned about, sort of the fear that technology is going to take over your role. We have an awesome question from the audience here.
Jason,
technology.
Can I add a bit onto that? Because well, it may actually dovetail into the next question. I think that what we've been seeing, the conversations that we've been having with prospects, number one, the prospects are different, unfortunately. Some of the folks aren't there in the operations, but the challenge has been, how do they sustain that? So the opportunities are, again, how do we the sense of we have to make do. So how do we make do? And that there's a component of outsourcing, there's a component of technology that gets applied. It's a rethinking of how things are done to be able to keep things moving forward and the lights on kind of at the same time. How do they prepare for the new reality?
Yeah, great point, Lou. Great point. So this question from the audience, I'm going to bring it to you, Julia, and then Bianca, if you don't mind. It's if technology does a certain job or function today, what can those people do instead? Any higher value activities? I think that's a great question, Julia. And I'll ask you, did you, in your personal experience, did you ever have the fear that a technology was going to take over your role? And, once you implemented technology, what did it free you up to do instead?
I think that I was never afraid it would take my job. I was pretty comfortable in my position, and I think I had sold the technology not as something that could replace me, but as something that could help me. And that's truly what it was for. I think, I think of something like OTA Insight, right? The rate shopping tool that I know a lot of hoteliers use, and I use and appreciate a lot. I mean, I used to spend time sitting and and Googling and seeing what the rates were for our competitors and writing them down so that I wouldn't forget later, or could go back and look later. We used to do the call arounds back in the day, right, at the front desk, and that's not a thing anymore. So and doesn't have to be a thing. And then I can take the time that I was spending collecting that data, and instead just take 30 seconds to download it, and then I have all of that time that I took getting it to use to analyze it and help make better decisions.
That's a phenomenal answer. Bianca, I'm curious from your perspective how you see technology freeing up, whether it's revenue managers or operation or sales or marketing, freeing them up to do more strategic things.
Yeah, I feel that it can help you actually work on the strategy instead of making you do reports or prepare reports or capture the business intelligence. So I think, again, it just enables you to do a better job at the end of the day when it comes to revenue and sales. On the operation side, I had an experience once at the time Mandarin Oriental in Vegas. There was a little robot at the check-in area, and it was actually something that you could ask the robot for recommendations for restaurants and things to do. I didn't enjoy that. I really didn't want the robot telling me where I should have dinner. But I do enjoy talking to a robot if I want to know the price of the parking, or if an extra bed will cost me something. So I think, again, the concierge, the really human experience you want to have from another person, so that will never be replaced. But the mechanical parts of the operations, I think those can be replaced by technology easily. So again, I think operationally, there are certain areas that will always remain. So we need people, but for other areas, there is really no need to have humans anymore.
Where did you end up having dinner? I mean, there's so many options in cities. Couldn't go wrong, right? You could have dinner at 15 different places and have an amazing time at all of them.
Yeah, but trust me, the robot did not give me good recommendations because he was a robot. So he was telling me the closest places and, gave me a wide array of options that I would never go to. So never trust a robot for dinner options. Prove me wrong.
Lou, I've got a question for the audience that I think is perfect for you. What are the pros and cons of buying technology that is purpose-built for hospitality versus a general solution?
If it's purpose-built, that they've thought through the use cases that apply to the industry, and at a certain level, there's a lot of value that exists there. If you're trying to tackle a larger problem, and particularly, I think it almost ends up being a decision of a hotel versus a hotel group. If a hotel group is trying to build something that's tailored, that they need to own some component that's around the guest experience, for example, something that they want to make the part of their brand, that's when having the flexibility to go outside of them and use something that's built for industry, they can hopefully tailor it and make it their own. And perhaps they have the ability of using some technologies that come from the investment that's been made in other industries. So if you look at the Salesforce example, it's not that somebody built a BI tool for hospitality. It's that there was a BI tool built for industry, and then it's exposed within Salesforce. Similar with Marketing Cloud. It's the same concept of AWS, that you have all kinds of web services. You have all kinds of functionality available to you by consumption.
Yeah, great answer. Priya, Estella, I'm curious. I'm sure both of you are going to pitch for the purpose-built for hospitality technology, but I'm curious as to why you think that's the case. Priya, let's start with you.
Yeah, very much. Echoing the sentiments here, it is like you said, you are catering to a specific business model, your specific operational and use case scenarios that are very typical to your industry and not necessarily one that is found across industries. It's similar to, when you look at roles, some roles are across different domains, okay? But some are very essential to come with that preset knowledge and experience when you want to fulfill or plug in a person in that role. So similar to that concept, I would definitely pitch for a purpose-built software that caters to your specific business requirements and is not just generic.
Awesome. Estella, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, for hoteliers themselves, having a platform that understands, has the knowledge, experience, understanding that you can apply your operations and your strategy to is very, very useful. And again, it makes it where you can implement more features without a huge amount of cost. But I will say from a technology provider perspective, for example, we do sometimes use open source applications for the bulk delivery, for example, of messages or SMS, etc. So we are open to that, but because we are in technology. For hotels, I think someone that understands that side is very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lou.
Just to add, it's not that I have something against purpose-built solutions. We partner. We have 70 partners. We enable anybody that with connectivity. So we have about 70 partners that have predominantly purpose-built solutions for hospitality that we provide connectivity for.
Awesome. We've got some great questions rolling in from the audience. I'm just gonna read them here. We've got 9 minutes left, so let's take a few minutes to answer these questions. This is a great one, and anybody can jump in. What are the biggest pitfalls for a hotel to watch out for when revamping their tech stack? I love this one. Could it possibly be you picked the wrong product or the wrong vendor? Did you have false expectations? Too many cooks in the kitchen? Lack of internal ownership? What are the pitfalls you guys see when building when
Yes.
tech stack? Yeah, probably all of the above.
Yes to all of the above. Also, one thing that I would add is, well, RFP processes can be valuable. Many times those RFPs are created to keep the existing operation and measure against vendors. And it sometimes makes it somewhat inflexible into thinking, could I do this differently? So in order to, as the question says, wrong product or vendor, there's some level of standardization as you're evaluating your vendors, but also internal evaluation of what it is that you're trying to achieve as you're coming up with those RFPs, and having that internal objective, and then seeing how the key results come back.
Stella's right on. It's all about the why. Why are you doing anything? Understand the why, and then you can figure out what's the best way to deploy. But there's no point in doing any part of it if you don't have a goal in mind.
And I think on the hotelier side, selecting someone on the team to own the process from beginning to end is incredibly important. And when there are too many people, or someone that's kind of in charge but isn't able to really get back to things because they're busy, it's important that there's one contact that can make decisions, to be in touch with the tech provider as you're sort of in the build and installation process. And that person needs to sort of own it all the way through to completion and go live. And then, in the end, still be an expert on the product and can be a resource for your team as things come up.
Yeah, Julia, I'm glad you jumped in there. I was going to ask you kind of a tricky one. Without naming a product, without naming the vendor, have you had an experience where it just didn't go right, and how do you overcome that?
I have. There was one in particular that was not that long ago. We were looking to build mobile key functionality. It was right as we were sort of had just shut down, and we knew that was going to be an important piece of our reopening. And it was someone who had sort of promised us that they could build this app that would have that integrated, and that they could integrate with our systems. And it took a while, but it became very clear that they could not. And and I think it was shame on us for picking a provider that wasn't already integrated and wasn't already set up. I think they sold us on the other pieces of their product that we thought would be really helpful for our business, but we wasted a lot of time and effort on that.
Yeah, I've heard that story a lot, and I'm curious from the providers how you You know, false expectations, I think, is a great one to bring up. I hear that a lot from talking with technology providers, is that, you know, somebody in the hotel may think that getting this solution is going to solve all their problems, right? And they're going to be at 100% occupancy, and they're going to be, you know, the best RevPAR that they've ever had. You know, how do you sort of manage those expectations? Estella, do you mind?
Sure. Some of it is in answering what the technology will bring and what the operational piece needs to be on that side as well. Because there's a lot that technology can enable, but there are certain practices that, again, they will need to be followed in the hotel. So as Julia was saying, having an owner that can make the decisions that, okay, we will change our practices and do it in the way that the technology enables operationally, allows you to get to that end result. And that's where sometimes it is difficult when you have too many cooks in the kitchen, and the expected answer was this, but there was no way of enabling the technology to deliver.
Yeah, Priya, do you have anything to follow up there?
I was just actually going to echo Julia's sentiment. I think in terms of just getting in new technology, of course, make sure that your whys are answered, but also more importantly, have a champion. Have a driver that is enabling this for your own SOPs, for your own internal operational needs, because it's a partnership of both the technology provider as well as the solution that you're looking to adopt for your property. So you need to make sure that you work in hand with the vendor to have those requirements met. Then, of course, the whole concept of flexibility and scalability. As you grow from 3, 4, 10 properties, you need to make sure that your vendor is able to grow with you. And then the robustness of the platform itself. So again, not to go with a vendor that you know does not have a proven track record, to make sure that there is the proof of concept that you need. Make sure that they have the scalability to grow into the different markets that you're probably opening into. But have all those factors in mind as well.
Great. With that, we do have a couple open questions, but we're not going to be able to get to them. I apologize. I will send them over to our panelists and we can answer them. We can get back to you specifically on these questions. But with that, I think we'll wrap up. And what I'd like to do is thank all of our panelists so much for taking the time out of their busy days to do this. I think it's been very inspirational and I hope educational. I hope there were a good number of takeaways for the audience, because that's always the goal. So thank you, audience, for tuning in, and thanks for asking questions. And thank you all panelists for participating. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Adios,
Bye-bye.
guys.